Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death globally. An estimated 17.9 million people died from cardiovascular disease in 2019, and it represented 32% of all global deaths. Of these deaths, 85% were due to heart attack and stroke. I don't think you're surprised by that, but what exactly is cardiovascular disease? What causes it? What can you actually do right this very second to prevent it? Today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Good day and welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. I'm Garrett Williamson, your host, president of Personal Edge Fitness. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you taking time out to follow this series that I'm doing on the different causes of death and for the top 10 causes of death around the nation, around the world. The main reason why we're doing this is because of basically the lack of understanding of all of them. But before we get going, I want to talk to you about how you can get in touch with us. Thank you so much for all the calls we've gotten. Had a lot of people reach out to us about my podcast on diabetes. I was glad to hear that. Actually, kind of saddened to hear it because there was so much discrepancy about what diabetes is. But I was glad they contacted me, and I'm glad that everybody got a chance to hear that. So I don't think that cardiovascular disease is going to be any different. But if you're interested in contacting me about any questions concerning this podcast or any other, you can contact me at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also contact me at my email address, which is garrett@personaledgefitness.com. That's our website, of course, personaledgefitness.com, and our Facebook page, Personal Edge Fitness. And if you want to get in touch with me via Twitter, it's at Team PE. And I hope I hear from you. Cardiovascular disease, that's probably the birthplace of fitness, is in cardiovascular disease. Of course, there was strength training and stuff going on before we got into what happened in 1953 with a very popular celebrity having a heart attack and all of us getting very obsessed about heart disease. That event, and then Dr. Cooper's efforts on bringing fitness to the forefront, a lot of it dealing with heart disease. I think heart disease is basically the birthplace of fitness. That's the reason I call it that. I think that was the overwhelming response really happened when we got into cardiovascular fitness or coronary artery problems. Now, right now, it is the number one killer, supposedly, by the statistics. You know how I feel about that. Rapidly approaching, believe it or not, is cancer. But I wanted to take a podcast, just like I did with diabetes, and explain what is cardiovascular disease. And I want to back up even farther than that, because you hear words like disorder, disease, conditions, syndrome. But do you really know the difference between those? And I want to do a quick vocabulary lesson before we go to that. And you'll see I've got notes with me on this because I want to make sure I had to go through them. Because I don't know that I could accurately describe, I kind of know what they are, but I don't know if I could accurately describe what the difference is between them. A disease is a pathophysiological response to an internal or external factors. I like the way they said disease is a response, because I've said that about the different diseases that are in the top 10 killers. That is a result. You don't catch heart disease. You have different risk factors that lead up to getting heart disease. And heart disease is one of those that we categorize as a disease. It's the body's response to these different internal and external factors. A disorder is a disruption to regular body structure and function. So going with heart disease, we talk about disorder. You can have heart disease and develop the disorder of an arrhythmia. And that is something going wrong with the heart inside the body. That is something that has been caused by the body from disease or what have you. And now we have this reoccurring disorder in the body. A syndrome is a collection of signs and symptoms associated with specific health-related cause. Now, the one that I think that most people know is, of course, Down syndrome. In fact, I rarely, if ever, hear anybody refer to it as just one word, Down or Downs. That's always referred to as Down syndrome. And that is when you have that extra chromosome. That extra chromosome is one of the different specific related causes in the body that's causing that syndrome. A condition is an abnormal state of health that interferes with normal or regular feelings of well-being. And a condition is something like dementia. Dementia does affect your normal, regular feelings of well-being. It is an abnormal state of health. I just wanted to run those real quick because when we're talking about heart disease, we are talking about the body's response to internal or external factors, and it's things that's the result. A disease is a result of that. Now, we have all heard of cardiovascular disease, but there are several different types of cardiovascular diseases. I'm not going to go deep into a lot of these, but I do want to list them and let you know which ones they are. You'll find a unique similarity in every single one of them, which I think is the basis of all heart disease. You've got coronary heart disease, which is a disease of the blood vessels supplying blood to the heart muscle. You've got, I always have difficulty with this one, cerebrovascular disease. And that's whenever you hear of that cerebral, you know it's dealing with the brain. And that's a disease of the blood vessels supplying the brain. There's peripheral artery disease, PAD. A lot of people know about peripheral artery disease, and that is a disease of blood vessels supplying the arms and legs. As you can tell, I'm doing this podcast in the beautiful downtown Dog River. It is a gorgeous summer day, and we have boats going up and down, and sometimes we have a two-stroke jet ski that will run by, and that's what we just enjoyed there. So peripheral, when we talk about peripheral, we're talking about things not in the center. They're out on the outlying edges, and that's why peripheral artery disease is a disease of blood vessels supplying of course, arms and legs. You've got rheumatic heart disease. Now, if you've heard of the rheumatoid or rheumatic, that should be somewhat familiar to you. That's a damage to the heart muscle and heart valves from rheumatic fever caused by streptococcal bacteria. Congenital heart disease. Birth defects. Congenital typically means it happened in birth or it's got to do with the genes. Birth defects that affect the normal development and functioning of the heart caused by malformations of the heart structure from birth. And, of course, deep vein thrombosis. Some of you have probably heard about deep vein thrombosis, but may not have known that it was actually a cardiovascular disease. And this is a deep vein thrombosis or a pulmonary embolism. It's a blood clot in the leg veins which can dislodge and move to the heart and lungs. Now, that's a quick listing, I know, and we're going to talk about those that are really highly preventable. But when you think about cardiovascular disease, it basically means blood blockage. And if you want to boil it down to its core, cardiovascular disease is something that causes, on a regular basis, blood blockage. And so it's an easier way to think about it, easier way to look at it. And most forms of coronary artery disease are thoroughly preventable. Let's talk about two of the biggest that we've heard about before, heart attack and strokes. Now, I have to admit that as a kid, when I'd hear that somebody had a heart attack, I felt like I heard they had either a heart attack or a stroke, or they had a heart attack and a stroke. And so I started thinking of the two as the same thing. If somebody said they had a stroke, that meant he had a heart attack, or vice versa. Of course, I learned later on that wasn't the case. But for those of you that might not know the difference, heart attack and strokes, they're acute events. But a heart attack is a blockage of blood flow to the heart muscle, and it's also called a myocardial infarction. And a stroke is block of blood to the brain. Pretty simple, but that's what the difference between the two. And when you have blockage of blood to any organ, you of course can cause damage to that area, and that's why it's so imperative to act fast on a heart attack and definitely on a stroke, because you start damaging parts of the brain. You can recover from the stroke, but the brain can't recover. Let's get to the causes, because I really want to go deep in on cardiovascular disease, seeing as it is listed as the quote-unquote number one killer. And if you don't know why I say that quote-unquote, and then I'll tell you, of course I'm going to tell you at the end of this. When we get to causes, we talk about risk factors. And I started thinking about this because there's a major confusion I believe, about at least one symptom of a heart disease, and we list it as a risk factor. And before we got into that, I wanted to give you, again, vocabulary lesson, talk about the difference between a risk factor and a symptom. A risk factor is something that obviously increases the chance of developing a disease. I don't think that's surprising to anybody. That's what a risk factor is. A symptom is a physical or mental feature which is regarded as indicating a condition of the disease. Okay, risk factor is something that increases your chances of it. And a symptom is something that is associated with it, something that's going on that is associated with an indication that you have that disease. Keep those in mind, because we're going to go through, I'm going to do a quick listing, then I'm going to go back over these in a minute, of the risk factors listed by the National Institute of Health and several other places, the risk factors associated with heart disease. And I'm not doing these really in any particular order, but high blood pressure, a quote-unquote unhealthy diet, lack of exercise, obesity, diabetes, smoking, and last, which is high cholesterol. Going through that risk factor and symptoms, let's keep that in mind. So when you got high blood pressure, What is high blood pressure? Well, high blood pressure basically is, well, it's just like it sounds. It's putting a lot of pressure on the arterial walls, which can cause, through different things traveling through the blood, can cause scarring, which can lead to clotting. If you have a clot, then you're going to have an interruption in blood flow, which we pointed out earlier. That's the basis of all cardiovascular disease, is interruption in blood flow. So obviously, if you have high blood pressure, that's clearly a risk factor of heart disease. An unhealthy diet. Well, I know what they're saying. They're saying if you eat the right good foods and what have you. Well, that's not actually true. When they say unhealthy diet, what they really mean, though they may not know this, is they do mean controlling amounts and make sure we're not overdoing it. And I understand about good foods and what everybody says, but the bottom line of it, if you don't understand that, please go back and listen to my series on the lie of food, and you'll understand that it actually boils down to amounts. We would not have an obesity problem if we spent 1/10 of the time studying amounts and teaching people about amounts as we have trying to teach which is the prettiest food. Okay, I'll get off that subject. Why is that? Well, if you put too much into the body, then you're going to end up with a lot of these problems. We saw this with diabetes. Diabetes is not a problem of sugar. It's once you've caused an overabundant problem in your body, now that little tipping point of sugar is going to mess up with your insulin. And that's no different here. You start taking in too much, you're going to typically cause a high blood pressure situation. Things are going to get in there. Excess fat is going to get into your veins, and along with that scarring from the high blood pressure, you're going to cause that blockage, you're going to cause a problem. It's pretty easy to see where that quote-unquote overabundance, or as they call it, unhealthy diet, can cause a problem. Also, salt itself you need that to live. Salt is not bad, but an overabundance of it can cause problems, and that can also cause high blood pressure. Lack of exercise, obviously. One thing, stress relief. The number one cause of strokes is stress. One way we relieve stress, as I've talked to you about before in the podcast I did on stress, I talked about stress is basically our body's flight or fight reaction. And one way we can alleviate that stress is through exercise. Another way, of course, is making sure that we're increasing our circulation. Therefore, we are working those blood vessels. We're working that entire cardiovascular system. We're calling on it to open up all the capillaries that may be closed. And so we're exercising on a regular basis. Therefore, the arterial walls won't get as rigid. There's several other benefits to exercise. I'm sure you understand. One of the biggest, of course, is making sure that you have a balance of good tissue. The real meaning of obesity is 30% of body fat or more for a woman, 25% of body fat or more for a man. And if you have a healthy body tissue, good ratio, in other words, lower than 25% body fat for men and lower than 30% body fat for women, then you're going to have less chance of heart disease, since obesity is the number one quote-unquote risk factor of heart disease. So obviously exercise is going to play a part. Diabetes, I think that goes hand in hand with obesity. Those are risk factors, but yes, they can be. Once you've had that, now you've got more difficulty. But obviously, you've also provided a situation where heart disease can exist. So honestly, diabetes is as much a symptom as it is a risk factor. Then smoking. Smoking is interesting. Actually, that was found in a 1970s study that smoking can cause arterial damage. And therefore, if you're causing damage, if you're going to cause that smooth arterial wall to change in any way, either harden or get scratches in it or what have you, you can cause blockage. And smoking does that in several different ways. Now, the last one is high cholesterol. Now, the reason I leave high cholesterol as the last one is that they say that is a risk factor. And something very interesting about this, I've talked about this on several occasions, and that is that it is proven. It is proven, and it's proven back in the 60s, possibly late 50s, but I know in the 60s, it was proven that high cholesterol is a symptom of heart disease. It has never been proven that it is a risk. It is a cause of heart disease. If it were, then the lipid hypothesis would have been proven true, and it's never been proven true. I've talked about that several times. I've talked about the lipid hypothesis and the fact that is the birthplace of the lie of food and what has caused so much obesity around the nation, around the world for that matter. Just to give you an example, one of the studies they used, and probably one of the most significant studies early on that they used to try to prove Ansel Keys' theory about the lipid hypothesis, was in 1970s, the MR-FIT study is what it's called. It's referred to as, it looks like Mr. Fit, MR-FIT study. And it was done by our National Institute of Health. It had 12,000 men in it, and was $115 million was spent on it. This was a real extensive study, and still did not prove that the lipid hypothesis is true, though it did prove And there were some British studies that did the same thing. It did prove there's a direct link between smoking and heart disease. So therefore, heart disease is clearly a risk factor. Why high cholesterol is put in that list, I don't think I'll ever know. I was telling you when I started this, there's something you can do, or things that you can do to prevent this. And I say that most of them are preventable. Most heart disease is preventable. And there's even something you can do right now to prevent it. There's some that are blatantly obvious. Lower your stress level. Okay, how do you do that? You can do that through exercise. You can do that through meditation. You can do that through yoga. You can do that through diet. But definitely lowering your stress level. Obviously, increasing exercise. Now, of course, I'm going to say this. I'm thinking by sitting back there going, wow, I'm really surprised. You mean if you exercise, you can prevent heart disease? Of course you can. Of course, everybody knows that. Quitting smoking. If you're smoking, of course, giving it up. I think the most important one, obvious to me, has to do with stress level. When we talked about the reason we overeat, a few weeks ago, I did a podcast on a quick hit talking about our In It to Lose It program and how you can actually change your brain, then you can actually change your potential for being overweight or lose weight. And one of the big things I talked about was what causes us to overeat. There's only one thing that causes us to overeat. It's cravings. And there's only two reasons why we crave. One of them is lack of water, and the other one is stress. So mitigating stress is very important. If you're taking a drink, if you are smoking a cigarette, if you are biting your fingernails, if you are getting angered at different times and blowing off the handle, hitting things, whatever, congratulations. That's what you're doing to alleviate stress. And those people that think they don't have stress, and I don't do that, and I don't have those reactions, you do. I promise you. Your fight or flight is the same. You have those reactions in your body, and you're going to act out against it. So it's easy enough to say quit smoking. Just put the cigarette down. That seems very easy. Well, no, of course it's difficult. Why is it difficult? Well, it's an addiction. Why is it addiction? It's addiction to that is the way somebody has found to alleviate their stress. That nicotine makes them feel better. And so we have to find a way to mitigate that stress. Drinking's the same way. Overeating is the same way. So mitigating that stress is extremely important. But I did tell you there was something you can do right now, right this very second, to help prevent heart disease. And it is significant. I want to say that because when I tell you this, I'm afraid you're going to turn me off and, oh yeah, whatever, I've heard that before. Because it's so easy that nobody does it. I'll say nobody, but less than 30% of people. You knew it was coming. I don't know why you should be at all surprised. But yes, of course, simply drinking water lowers your chance for heart disease significantly. Why do I say that? Let me tell you. All right, first and foremost, high blood pressure. I think high blood pressure is one of the things I'm going to end up doing a podcast on anyway, because I think it's rather significant. Something that a lot of people don't understand, and something that a lot of people have been told, well, your daddy had it, but you have it. There's too much of that is untrue. There may be true, but there's too much of that that's untrue. And the reason I say that is that, well, my daddy ate the same way I do, and I have the job that my daddy had, and I'm all that, but it's because of his genes that I have high blood pressure. No, I don't agree with that. What happens with high blood pressure is that when your blood vessels open up, when they dilate, when you start exercising, that's what a warm-up is. You're not trying to get the body where it's sweating. You're trying to open up all those blood vessels, capillaries, veins, arteries. You're trying to get them to open up so that you can have better, easier transfer of blood, therefore energy, to those muscles, even those nerve endings, everything works better. And so when they dilate, there's not air in there. It's funny, when we're shown videos of blood cells moving through an arterial wall, whatever, we're shown all this, looks like pockets of air. It looks like just these little round things running through, and then the vessels just open, there's nothing else running in there. No, there's no air in there. If they had gases in there, they'd cause something called a gas block. And so what actually opens it is the fluid itself. And so if you lower the amount of water in your body, as I've told you before, your body's going to adjust. If you're only getting 30% of the water you need, your body's going to say, okay, we're not ever going to operate like we were at 100%, but we're going to give you our best at 30%. And so it's going to shut down. It's going to draw water from cells to try to keep those vital arteries and veins open. It's going to shut down the capillaries. Hey, we don't need the capillaries. We're going to shut them down, and it's going to actually end up constricting the walls. And whenever you constrict the walls, you can increase your blood pressure. And that's just by not drinking enough water. And so as you're sitting there listening to this, drinking water actually can help you fight heart disease. Okay, I've done my water talk for today. You knew it was coming at some point in time. I gave that to you. I'm going to give you one more. Before I do, let me let you know how to get in touch with us if you have any questions about this. You can reach me at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also contact me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. Personaledgefitness.com, of course, is our website, our Facebook page, and if you want to contact me via Twitter, it's at Team PE. But like I did with diabetes, I'm doing the same with heart disease. You're going to find a little trend here. Heart disease is supposedly the number one killer. Diabetes, I forgot it. In top 10, I want to say it's around 6 or 7, and I don't remember now. And you're going to find this when I talk about the other two. The top risk factor for heart disease, just like the top risk factor for diabetes, is obesity. You're going to find them letting the chicken out of the coop or letting the cat out of the bag by saying you're going to find that that's the same situation with these 4 of these killers that I'm talking about. 4 of the top 10 killers associated with their number one causes risk factor is, of course, obesity. And as I've said before, of the other top 10, I mean, it is on the list. It's even on the list. It's pretty far down, but it's even on the list for suicide, which is one of the top 10 killers. It's even on the list for accidents, which is one of the top 10 killers. It's number 7. Risk factor number 7 for cancer. It's risk factor number 2 for dementia. And risk factor number 9 for lung problems. So as I said before, obesity is the number one killer. Obesity is one we need to get under control. We need to ignore BMI. We need to find out what that is. What if we are obese? It doesn't mean you're large. You can be thin and be obese. It happens to do with the ratio. But figure that one out. Make sure you stay out of that territory. And I'm telling you, you'll probably stay away from at least 4 of the top 10 killers. Bringing you the truth and explaining what cardiovascular disease, heart disease, or cardiovascular disease actually is. Just one more way. We help you reach your level of wellness. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.